Hi, yes. Can you hear us okay?
Yep.
Sorry, I'm still getting familiar with the setup. Yeah, my name's Rogage. I'm an associate professor in the School of Computing at Northumbria University. I'm also the programme lead for computer science at Northumbria University. Do you want any more than that, Paul, at this stage, or is that enough?
Uh, I think that's probably enough for now. Then we can bring out the rest in the questioning.
Okay.
Thank you. Stefan, could you jump in next?
Hi everybody, Stefan Mordue. I'm Senior Manager of Education and Partnerships at Bentley Systems. I'm a Chartered Architect and Construction Manager, and really privileged to author a few books on building information modelling, in particular with a health and safety slant.
And we've got to thank Stefan and Bentley Systems for sponsoring this particular discussion. Right, Alison.
Hi, thanks Paul. Hi everyone. I'm Alison Watson. I am the founder of Class of Your Own. Created the Design Engineer Construct programme, and we're basically bringing young people through to be you in the audience through curriculum and basically dynamic learning. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's my day job. So thanks for inviting me.
Okay, no problem at all. Thank you for coming. Suha, could you introduce yourself, please?
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Hello everyone, good afternoon. I'm Suha Jaradat. I'm Associate Professor of Architectural Technology and Program Leader of Architectural Technology Programs at Edinburgh Napier University. I'm also a Chartered Architectural Technologist and Chartered Building Engineer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Andy, could you bring up the rear?
Yeah, cheers, Paul. Hi, everyone. I'm Andy Adams. I'm founder and managing director of T3 Training and Development, who specialise in delivering apprenticeships and short courses. And I'm also the owner of a small detailing practice specialising in reinforced concrete design.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Andy. And finally, for myself, Paul Woddy, I am in the day job. I have a company called White Frog. We produce training material used in colleges and universities around the world, and I specialise in educational strategy. I'm here today as the Vice Chair of NIMA for Education and Upskilling, and it's my role to define NIMA's strategy around how we approach the upskilling that's required around IM, both in terms of academia and commercial practice. So, with this expert panel, we're going to explore a number of wow, it's moving fast. Explore a number of topics around new ways of doing things. We're not looking to sort of just discuss the same old of what's going on and talk about a few things that are just following the old way of doing things. We're trying to explore, and this panel has been brought together in order to explore what could be done differently. How can we approach things in a way that makes it more exciting, both in terms for sort of the younger generation coming through, but also for the wider population of people that need upskilling on IM. So those of us that have been around for a while but still need to be upskilled. So I'm going to start by asking a question of Alison. That's okay. And I know that you've been working tirelessly to further the cause of built environment education in schools and colleges around the world. And you've just opened an office in Australia and do a lot in the Middle East. Now, I'm not going to ask you what problems you've faced along the way because we haven't got
Here a long time.
But what I would like to ask is whether you've encountered any policies or approaches in other countries that we should really be looking at and exploring for adoption here in the UK.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I mean, great question, and yeah, like you say, I could spend a year talking about the issues here in UK, and I guess it's almost flip it on its head. If I could do what I've done over the last 60 years and start again, I will probably not start in this country. And for a very good reason. I think there's still a huge disconnect around the world, to be fair, around education and industry. And I think my travels around the world, you mentioned Australia, you mentioned the Middle East, but actually Southeast Asia for me is just so dynamic. And I think the reason that it's different in such as Malaysia, for example, where we've got the best schools in Malaysia using our built environment curriculum to improve mathematics, to apply mathematics and so on. And you come back here and we're still struggling with GCSE passes and everything else. And over in Malaysia, the best math schools in the country are using applied learning. DEC, Design, Engineer, Construct, they're using our program, but they're actually using it because they can see the real benefit of the real world learning. And I think what stands out most is how other nations are trying to align their education system directly with national priorities. So you've got everything from sustainable development and digital capability, that whole sort of workforce resilience, and education in some of these, particularly in the Southeast Asia, it's not seen as that separate agenda. And I think maybe a lot of it is to do with the approach to, engineering is a great career, whereas over here it's still, is it that guy with the oily rag? And I can't believe after 20 odd years we're still saying that. But the perception of engineers, the perception of surveyors. I'm a surveyor, I'm so respected in Australia, but here it's kind of like, we are professional, we really are. So I think there's a different reverence given to professions in the built environment that our country still lags behind. And I think also what's really important, just very quickly, is that around the world they teach teachers, they train teachers first, so they're properly equipped and confident with all that, whether it's a digital tool or a curriculum change. They focus on, okay, well, who's going to deliver this first, instead of just launching something, groundbreaking curriculum, going, okay, get on with it. And I think that's where we still lag behind massively in this country, that there's an expectation that we'll develop a curriculum, as in the government will develop a curriculum. There's been a big curriculum review. We're going to introduce finance and AI and all that. But who's going to teach it? And where is the space and time given for teachers to actually learn what to many of them is a new agenda? It's just like, hit the ground running, you're going to teach this tomorrow, which is why I think when IT became sort of computer science, a lot of teachers were really flailing. It's why the T levels with design, surveying and planning, particularly in all the T levels, to be fair, that first year when you've got to do digital, and a lot of the FE colleges are going, we don't do that, we're bricklayers and joiners. So there's a whole lot of improvement needs to be made in this country. And yes, we can learn from abroad. And the biggest thing that we can learn, the DFE, for example, needs to learn that our professions, our industry is right up there with your traditional law and your finance and everything else. And I think until they get a grip on that, we'll still be having these conversations in 10 years.
So I guess we're all trying to do is to try and grab those really talented students and bring them into the fold as early as possible, as opposed to people who are instantly jumping to construction are those that perhaps are not scraping the barrel, but they're lower down the order of ability. We need to grab the good ones and get them excited.
Yeah, young, and I think at the end of the day that there is still a massive disconnect, and until we join the dots, and I think what can NEMA do next? Absolutely, make sure that your Bridget Phillipsons, for example, who make all these grand statements and a lot of respect, she's done it. I think this government has tried really hard to move the dial back into that we should respect vocational education. I'm beginning to hate and loathe the word, but the reason that we're starting early is not just to bring in the best talent, but to make sure that kids understand that this industry will give them everything they need in terms of that opportunity to improve their maths and English and everything else. And unfortunately, I still don't think that our government quite gets the how. They know what needs to be done, but they don't quite understand how and what they need to do to make that happen. So okay. I think we can influence that.
All right, great. Andy, if I could just come to you next. You're sort of you're in the next step, if you like, of the once the sort of school children come out of secondary school, they come into college, they come into apprenticeship framework. And obviously, Alison's doing a great job in pushing STEM awareness and construction career opportunities in secondary schools and even in sixth forms, but not everybody gets that opportunity to go through the kind of programs like that. For most learners that come through wanting a career in construction, the first taste they get is in that FE college environment and potentially, the apprenticeship framework. In general, how well do you feel that digital is supported in that arena?
I think before I go into that, I think it's probably worthwhile just sort of touching on a little bit that Alison said. So I started off before I set my training company up. I owned my own design and detailing practice, so relatively small, and we couldn't grow that business because there were no new talent coming into the sector. So I kind of took a bold step and set my own training company up, and invested a lot of time, energy, and effort to try and do something positive, not just for my company, but try and improve sort of education across the board, really, from an engineering, construction, design point of view. So I think there was a massive gap then, and there still is today. And I think what Alison's doing with her lights, with the DEC qualification, it's really like hitting home with what's missing out of our current educational system. But in terms of kind of like how digital's covered now, and I think it's all right in some respects. I think we've got an handle on it because we work with a lot of large employers, and I think that's another critical thing, is getting employers involved, supporting industry, supporting education in making sure that what we're covering is relevant and does meet the requirement of our sector, but not just now, but for the future as well. So I think it's hit and miss in some areas, and I think the key point, and Alison touched on it again, is it's the quality of people that we've got delivering the specializations within the qualifications. There's just not enough people they may know the principles of what they've learned at university, but actually putting that into practice in industry is a different thing altogether. So I think it's a challenge, and I think it can only improve. Hopefully, we need to take a big step to try and work as a collective, and that goes not just for education, not just for government, but for industry as well. We need the support for people in industry to make sure that what we're doing is relevant.
Yeah, and I think Andy, you're sort of an exception to the rule in terms of how you're kind of handling a lot of these issues, and I know you've done a lot of good stuff around MMC. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in terms of training for MMC site work?
Yeah. So we went on a journey actually with Langerock. We identified a massive shortfall within education on actually upskilling people in the site skills to actually build the models that we're creating. So when we're looking at precast concrete timber frame houses, we're working with Vistry as well. So nowhere replicates what you need to do to actually build any structure on site within education at the minute. Nowhere. And we decided to take a bold step to recreate a site that replicated what you would actually build on site. So we've developed a concrete solution with Langerocks and a timber frame solution with Vistry. So we took the model, Langerock produced the precast components, Vistry produced the timber frame house, and then we take this assembly specialist, as we call them, from the journey of, right, you get the model, this is what you've got to build, now we're going to build it. So we've got a 40-ton crane on site, we have 4 or 5-ton precast concrete components on site, and the assembly specialists literally build from the model, they build the precast components as they would on site. And the same with the timber frame dwelling, we do the same with that. So obviously from assembling the timber, joining it, insulating it, fireproofing it. So we've took a step to sort of try and recreate actual live site in a training environment. So
that's very commendable, and so that kind of end-to-end approach of providing practical application. So you've got that digital end of doing the design, and you're taking that all the way through to practical application, and it's an amazing thing to see. Kate, could I just ask you, obviously you bring the context of construction into computer science teaching. So you're not teaching construction professionals per se, you're teaching data scientists, but using examples from construction. And it seems that these days, that in itself I find quite compelling. But I just want to get your take on sort of topic of the day in terms of AI, and kind of the question of kind of quantity versus quality, the impact of all of this data that we're bringing in. How do you teach sort of data management from a construction perspective when the future seems to be about gathering as much data as possible and letting AI sort it out?
Yeah. So I think it's probably worth saying that I was in industry as a software developer, developing software for the construction sector, which is why I've got the knowledge of the construction sector. I did that for 10 years before I came back into academia. So that's why I bring the construction context into the classroom, and I work with academics across architecture, built environment, and computer science, and it's really hard to bring computer science into the architecture practice or the built environment practice, and it's really hard to bring the construction context into computing practice. But I do try my best in bringing kind of real world examples of problems and data into the classroom. But just to kind of go back to your question around the sort of quantity and quality of data and what are the challenges around that. So up until now, I think it's been really about gathering as much data as possible and trying to standardize it in a way that it can be used and reused. But, during a building, like, you can have thousands of data exchanges happening during a building life cycle. And something like a big infrastructure project, you can have millions of data exchanges throughout the building throughout the life cycle of the infrastructure project. And that's creating huge amounts of data, unprecedented amounts of data that we've never really seen before. So one of the things I'm trying to get people to think about now and trying to sort of get people to acknowledge in the classroom is, when you've got a building, we talk about the operational carbon of a building and the embodied carbon of a building. Well, when we're collecting data and when we're using digital technologies, that also has a carbon footprint. And there's an operational footprint and there's an embodied carbon footprint. And this isn't something that we're really thinking about. And certainly I've not seen a lot of it being researched at all. Because as I see up until now, we've just been thinking about how can we get the data, how can we get the data right, how can we share the data. And what I've found in the sort of work that I've been doing is that it's quite scary, actually. So generally, not just in the construction sector, in 2021, there was a study done, and what that study found was around 2.5 billion gigabytes of data were created every day. Now, for those of us who are old enough to remember floppy disks, a floppy disk was about 2.5 megabytes. So we're talking about 1 trillion floppy disks get created every day, okay? The amount of CO2 emissions produced to store and transmit and process that data is around about the same level as the aviation industry. So again, in 2021, a study showed that just by storing data, transmitting it and processing it, we created around about 700 million tonnes of CO2 emissions. Whereas in the aviation sector, it was 720 million tonnes of CO2 emissions. So there's a real problem here. We talk about understanding data, structuring data in a way that it can be captured and used and reused across the building life cycle. We've brilliant inroads in, creating standards and guidance on how to do that. But I think from my perspective, and what I'm trying to get people to think about now in the classroom is, how do we do that more intelligently? Well, how can we do it in a way that ensures that the data that we're collecting is the right data and it can be reused? So alongside all of that, those big numbers and the impact that we're having on the environment, sorry, I know we're always getting told to consider net zero and build our buildings better and cleaner and greener, but we also need to think about how we're collecting and creating and using data in a more greener approach as well. So more than half. So thinking about that 2.5 billion gigabytes of data, more than half of that data generally is never used or reused. And there was a study by Jay Snyder on an infrastructure project which looked at the project had used 130 million emails, 55 million documents, and 12 million word files. And generally, in construction sector, we use something like 4.5% of the data collected. So if you think you've got 130 million emails, 55 million documents, and 12 million workflows, and you only use 4.5% of that data, the amount of time it's taken to create that data, somebody's in-person time to create that data. We've got to store that data, we've got to process that data in some way. That the cost that equates to is just mind-blowing. You know, so for me, I think we need to start being much more intelligent about understanding why we're collecting data and what we want to do with that data.
It's a pretty fascinating insight and a different way of looking at, which is exactly why I wanted you to be here, to sort of show us a different perspective on looking at this kind of new digital approach. I could sit here and listen for a long time. I do need to move on. Stefan, from your own perspective, as one of the people abusing the environment and using all this data, how do you think we can better bridge some of the kind of academia industry lessons? How can we learn from what's going on in the real world and try and take that into the classroom?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I'm in a really fortunate position in that I work for a software vendor, but I work in the education department, so I get to work with universities and colleges, and also have a foot still in industry. So it's kind of looking at those, what are those big gaps? And I think, you know, a lot of, I guess, universities and colleges are maybe still focusing on tools and software and modeling, which is going to sound strange being from a software vendor. Of course, these are really important, but just like Kay said, you know, we really need to be mindful about the data we're collecting and that underlying purpose. So what is the underlying purpose of information management? How does data actually drive decision making and operations and sustainable outcomes, all that stuff? So in industry, we tend to be talking about life cycle information, data quality, connected processes. It's not all just about producing the models. So, and I think nima can really play a good convener part of really bringing, you know, industry, technology partners, practitioners to the table. But I think we need to think about the different levels and the different people that we're talking to. You know, you've got leaders that need to understand the value of information management. They're going to drive culture. They're going to drive investment from the top. We've got the practitioners, which are, I guess, the engine room. They need that kind of clear, structured upskilling so they can deliver reliable, you know, consistent data across projects. And then we've got our grassroots, we've got our students. You know, our students are our long-term pipeline. And if we start to introduce IM principles early, before they enter the workplace, I think that's where we can really make a difference, and we can really start to close that skills gap that we talk about before it opens. So for me, it's about tailoring education kind of at each level. So whether that's awareness and leadership for decision making, whether it's technical depth for specialists, or whether it's that foundation learning piece for the next generation. And I know, Paul, we're going to be talking about this a little bit later on about NIMA's efforts in building a consistent skills framework. And I think that's really important, something that is consistent nationally or even internationally, that's going to start to map out these different skills and capabilities. And yeah, I look forward to talking about that later on this afternoon.
Yeah, that's at 4:30, that session in the Bentley Systems breakout room. We're talking about that educational strategy. So coming back to Suha, you're working within the constraints of delivering a curriculum for architectural technologists where the curriculum is fixed, the curriculum is set, and you've therefore got to kind of, you've got to fit new things in very, very carefully. How do you do that? What sort of initiatives do you take to fit in those new technologies and keep current within the constraints of a curriculum?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so we have many constraints, like within the schools, within the universities, also within the higher education sector and the built environment professional bodies that accredit our programs. So we have certain learning outcomes that we have to meet. However, we have some scope to be quite innovative and try like new methodologies. I'll give you like a couple of examples. For example, at Edinburgh Napier University, we developed the first graduate apprenticeship program in architectural technology, the first of its kind to be accredited by the CIAT, which is work-based learning. So mostly students are based in the company, they are employed by a company, spend 80% of their time there and 20% of their time at the university. So we try, for example, to teach them building modeling, of course, and information management. And they come from different companies. Some of them are large, some of them they will have knowledge and understanding and skills, and some of them will have never used this or heard of it. So some of them, they go back and start implementing this, leading this implementation, for example, of this modeling, 3D modeling and information management within their companies. And I think the main thing I would like to focus on is just this knowledge sharing, this partnership between the universities, academia, the industry, and the students who are part of this partnership. So partnership and knowledge sharing in terms of graduate apprenticeship programs, for example. There's also partnership in terms of knowledge transfer partnerships. Again, a partnership between a university, a company, and associate will be employed to lead. For example, at Edinburgh Napier, we had a KTP project, knowledge transfer partnership, in which we managed to help businesses develop and innovate an SME architectural practice. In this case, we worked together, so we all benefited from this partnership. So the company using the expertise, the research, the resources the university have, also for the university, having an insight of how this new way of working can be implemented in a small practice, and the associate who's leading this and the academic who was involved is also feeding this back into the classroom, teaching students. So I think the main points, partnership and knowledge sharing, will just enable us to explore new ways of working. And also, one last point, working with some software companies like Bentley, for example, to use some of their tools to help us explore and innovate and explore new ways of preparing the next generation of built environment professions for the workplace through this partnership.
Thanks, Suha. And it's probably worth remembering that that's implemented by the fact that Bentley do provide universities with free access to the software, which certainly helps.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got about 3 questions each for the panel that I'm not going to get a chance to ask because this session is way too short. I want to give Alison the last word because she likes that. I'm keen to understand, just as a final question, when young learners come out of the DEC process and they are ready, they're ready to go. They're ready as ready as some graduates, and then they go into the sort of traditional learning environment of the universities. What's that like for them? Do they feel as if they've dropped off a cliff, or are they supported in universities?
It's funny. I'm always going to go back, and Suha will laugh at this because she'll remember Sarah at Sheffield Hallam. Sarah, oh God, what's the surname? Help me. Anyway, Sarah is now at CAT, and she rang me up one day when she was she's supporting teaching and learning in architecture and architectural technology, and she said, Ali, we've got a problem. We either need to have all DEC students only on our first year, or no DEC students on our first year, because I think the thing with DEC, I kind of align it to French. If you do French from 11 to 18, you're pretty fluent in French by the time you leave school. Well, that's the same as DEC. It's that real world BIM, everything. Suha's seen it with students over at Napier University, where they come through, and they often describe their next step as kind of a bit of a shock, because they've been learning this digital collaborative problem solving environment, meeting loads of employers all the time, meeting incredible people who are doing what they aspire to do and have an appetite to do when they leave school. And then they move into systems that can feel quite traditional. It's not every university, but it's a lot of them. And I know some of our degree apprentices have come back and said, they're just not teaching the right stuff. It's not modern and everything else. And I think the positive side is that they do feel incredibly well prepared. I think that matters. They've arrived with that strong digital literacy, carbon literacy. They've got, good communication skills. They've got an understanding how, that sort of information driver for decision making, and it's exactly the kind of learners that industry keeps saying it needs. But the issue is that the system that they've moved into isn't necessarily joined up. So, I think please, nima, lobby, everyone in the room, lobby, because if we keep quiet about it and just expect that it's going to change, it's not. We need to stamp our feet, and please, everybody in the room, get your early careers working with social value, because social value is such a barrier to success to these students. And I can explain that another time, but please, get your HR teams to understand that social value isn't charity and fluffy spaghetti and marshmallows, and get real about social value and impact, please.
Thank you. That's a great way to end. And we are going to continue this conversation in the Bentley Education breakout room. As I say, at 4:30, we will be walking through the strategy for how we think we can fill some of these gaps and fix some of these issues, how NIMA is positioned to be able to do so. So if you can join us at 4:30 for that session, that would be amazing. But I take it the fact that Paul's arrived means that we're about to be kicked off stage.